Hello again, everyone. This is Zombie Kids Rule, and I'm back for the final video in this series. Probably the last video today. I've been having a hard time making videos lately. I make them and I either screw them up or some background noise interferes. I have problems with audio or whatever. So this will probably be the last video tonight. This is the third part of this series on this randomly determining which monsters you face, the respawning, remotely activating a random enemy, or essentially remotely activating any type of event that you want to like make appear based on something else you've done. And then for this one, it's the remote monster placement, which is essentially the same as deciding when to turn on other map events based on some other trigger, right? Doing something. In this case, we're triggering it, and it's randomly deciding which one it's going to turn on. So I, as the player, won't know. It'll constantly be a surprise. But it's also going to repeat the way I have this set up. So once again, I'll just show you. I'll demo this, focusing more on those four corner monsters. So the first one that appears is a random enemy that will respawn if I kill it. This other one over here is a random enemy that is delayed, and then it's activated by a trigger, and that appears, and it won't respawn until I leave the map. And then we have this guy down here. He was the one of the four corner monsters or enemies that appeared based on this random monster placement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of him, and we'll see. He could possibly be the first one to appear next time. It will all depend. And again, all of these four corner monsters are goblins. I did not, spend any time playing around with the database to get extra enemies. So now, which one's going to appear? Oh, it was him again. See, so he appeared again. So that was just randomly. He just happened to be, his number came up again. But what we did was originally his number was removed, so he couldn't be added. But then when I defeated him, his number was added back into the array. So now I'm going to leave and I'm going to come back, and we're pulling a different number from the array, and it activated the little werewolf guy. So now I'm going to leave and I'm going to come back, and it's going to randomly choose between one of these two guys. And now I'm going to go defeat the zombie guy, and we'll see if he comes back before, or actually maybe I'll defeat a couple of them, and then we'll see when the last corner monster appears. So let's get rid of this guy. That last corner that hasn't appeared yet, because what's happening is these enemies are stored in an array, and when they're selected, they're removed from the array. But when we defeat them, they're put back in. Yep, there we go. There's the werewolf guy. He appeared again. So he's appeared multiple times because we keep defeating him. And now, which one? Oh, there's the zombie guy. And again, even though they're all goblins, I just use different sprites to differentiate. And there she is finally. And so that's how that's working. And so we'll stop that there. The first part of this series talked about this event here, where we randomly determined which enemy you fight from the flashing sprite on the screen. It's a mystery, right? You don't know who you're going to fight when you go engage with that. And this one respawns after 10 seconds automatically. If you stay on this map, it'll respawn every 10 seconds after you beat it forever. This one is essentially, there's a delay, it's not there, and then after 2 seconds, it gets triggered. Right? Remember, a very short testing time frame. It gets triggered. The flashing light appears. So, oh, you don't know who you're going to fight. And then when you defeat it, it stays defeated until we leave the map. And then when we leave the map, we reset everything so that it will reappear after 2 seconds when we enter this map. Now these corner events, how are these working? So first, let me show you. We're going to load the array. So this little event over here, I named it R&D, Random Monster Array Set. And this is very similar to the previous tutorials that I did that were using arrays. And this is a very, very simple event on the map. It runs in parallel, so as soon as the map loads, this event starts to run along with any other event that is parallel or auto run or is being triggered. It's invisible, the player does not know that this is happening. The very first thing it does is it runs the common event random monster array load. And then it turns its self switch A on to advance this page so that nothing is happening, right? So once the array is set, it turns itself off until something else is going to influence it and basically turn off the self switch A remotely so that the array can be reset, okay, if it ever has to be. Now, the common event for this is um, random monster array load. And this is just very, very simple. It's you take a variable, right? I created a new variable called random array. Please note that it is variable 23 because you're going to see that number again. So random array is variable 23. And anything inside these brackets is in the array. So if it's a number, and I have a tutorial on using numbers in an array and then adding to the array. That's exactly what this is doing. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 values in this array, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just for ease of simplicity here, okay? That's all this is doing. There's no trigger, there's no switch, because this is not running until we call it, right? We're going to call it to make it work. So that all this is doing is it's setting the array. It's setting the values inside the array. Now this one, this random monster placement, which I highlighted earlier, right, on the part 2. This is waiting 120 frames for 2 seconds. It's running in parallel, so it's running automatically, and it's running this common event random monster test. And when it hits that common event random monster test, it's going to go to a common event that's going to turn on one of these corner monsters. Okay, one of these corner events. So let's look at the corner events first because they're very simple. Their first page is nothing, right? Because they're invisible. There's no sprite. There's a trigger of an action button. They're below the characters. The player won't even know that they're there because there's nothing to engage with. When their self switch gets turned on, and you can probably see where this is going from what I've already explained in the other tutorials. When the self switch A is remotely turned on, this page appears, which makes the sprite appear on the map. It's fixed, it's not moving, it's set to auto run because we want this page, which will immediately start running, we want it to turn on self switch B so that it can move to page 3 automatically and it can start to randomly walk around the map. Now, I had these set originally to approach, and they were set at a much higher speed. And what happened was every time I tried to test this, all the enemies on the screen would swarm around me, and I had a hard time avoiding them to test to get everybody on the screen to make sure it was working correctly. So I set it to random, so now they don't actually approach; they just kind of wander, and I made it much slower. And I made it, of course, to event touch so that when they do bump into you, they will trigger the contents of this page. Now, in a real game, I would most likely set this back to approach faster, and because I would want them chasing the player, perhaps. So there's a text, prepare to die, so you know what's going on. Then this triggers battle processing, and all 4 of these corner events trigger the goblin battle processing. Obviously, in a real game, if you had different sprites, they would be triggering a battle processing that is sprite appropriate. Or, like I mentioned in another video, maybe it's an enemy that summons enemies, right? So it's a humanoid, and when you engage with them, they suddenly yell out, "Ha! Fight my minions!" Right? And then it randomly selects a different battle processing or something. You could obviously do something like that. So the corner event is going to appear. The third page ends up being event touch, and the battle processing happens. And then once the battle processing is done, we're going to use a script to add that option back into the array, because now this sprite is going to disappear from the map, which means that corner event could be triggered again. If you didn't put it back in the array, essentially what would happen is you'd have to have all four of these corner events activate at some point in time. You'd have to destroy them all before before you would potentially reload the array and then have it happen all over again. And maybe that's what you want. Maybe you don't want everyone to start reappearing until you've defeated four of different monsters. And if you never defeat them, they never respawn. Maybe that's what you want to do. But for this testing purposes, I wanted each one of them to have a possibility of coming back as soon as they were defeated. So this script is what is putting that value back into the array. So this has also been used in another tutorial that I did. So this is $game variables dot value, okay, and then the number in the parentheses is the number of the variable. So this is saying, basically this is saying the variable 23, right? Variable 23. We're going to push, so dot push, we're going to push the value 1 into that variable, which is an array. Okay, so variable 23 is the array. And the 1 is the actual value that we're putting in there. If this was a 2, it'll push a 2 in there. If it's a 3, it's a 3. So that is the way you push a value into you add a value into a variable, an array that you have created. So $game capital V variables dot value 23, and it's in parentheses. So the array, right, 23, variable 23, which is an array, dot push, we're going to add the value of 1, so in parentheses, into that array. Okay? And then once it does that, and the only reason, and I know this because I created it, this is the roll of 1. So I know that that's the number that came out of the array, so that's the number I'm putting back, right? So you would have to pay attention to this very carefully. So then it's going to turn off the 2 self switches, which basically move this page back to the blank page so it can be triggered again, if randomly, right? If it gets triggered. And every single one of these corners is exactly the same, except that, so it starts off blank, and then self switch A gets triggered, a different sprite appears, it's auto run, it sets self switch B on, it moves the page, it does its text, prepare to die, it does its battle processing, and then this is the only thing that changes, the script. And the only thing that's changing is the value that we're putting back into the array. And this was a mistake of mine. You could probably see it. The event is actually labeled Random Monster 2, but in the array, the value that triggers this event is actually 3. So I just had to make sure that I knew that when the array value of 3 is selected, it triggers this event. And so when I want to re-add this event to the array as a possibility of being selected, I had to push the value of 3. And then so it turns off this self-switch A and B, which moves the page back here, and then it resets itself to be selected again. And as you can see, here are the exact same other corners, with the only difference being that this is a value of 2 now, and then with the other one, it should be the missing value. So these are exactly the same. It's the value of 4. So that is the only thing different about those corner events. They are exactly the same. Now, obviously, if you wanted to have different battle processing, that would be different. So, and you could have some of them random, some of them approach. You could have them at different speeds, right? You could do anything of that you desired. So those are the corner events. And then, so we saw the random monster placement, which is triggering the common event random monster test. And we saw the loading of the array, right? So now let's look at that random monster test common event that's doing a lot of the work. The first thing it does, okay, so it's not, there's no trigger, there's no switch, we're calling this, right? We're making it work, we're calling it. The first thing it does is it does a conditional branch and it checks to see if the array is empty. That's the very first thing it does. Because if the array is empty, I wanted it to reload the array. So if all and actually this should never happen now because I changed it, right? I When I first built this, I wasn't pushing the numbers back. I wasn't adding the numbers back into the array after the enemies were defeated. So the way I originally built this was they would stay gone from the array as you beat them, and when you beat the last one, the array would be empty. And so this was a way where it would check to see if it's empty, and if it is, it would reload it. And now this is really not necessary anymore because the array should never be empty. Because essentially, well, it would be empty if all four of them activated, and I never beat any of them, but they can appear if they're already on the screen. So it's really this isn't needed anymore. I could remove this completely. Now this is the script, the three different scripts in within one event command that you've seen in other tutorials, right? And you literally just have to copy this exactly the way it is. The first part, and I'll edit this here so you can see, the first part of this is the one that randomly selects a value from the array. That's what that's doing. It's using a number. So the first time I showed this, we were using words, right? And then I showed a tutorial for using numbers in array, and this is using numbers, numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. So numbers equal math dot random int, okay, and remember use the capitals where they're supposed to be. Parentheses $ game variables dot value 23 in parentheses, so that's the variable 23, which is the array, dot length, okay? And make sure you get your parentheses. And if we're using multiple scripts in here, I think this is where those semicolons become important and necessary. I haven't tested it without them, but I put them in there, and I haven't bothered to test without them to see what happens. And I don't know JavaScript that well to know if it would cause a problem. So the first line is basically pulling a value out of that array 23, 1, 2, 3, or 4. The second script is $game variables dot set value 22. So it's taking another variable, a variable 22, and it's setting the value of the that we took out of the array. So 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's setting it to that variable 22. That's what this script is doing. Okay, and remember when we did it with words, this was words, but now we're doing with numbers, it's numbers. And then the last part of this script is removing that array value option, right? It's removing the value option from the array. So it's $game variables dot value in parentheses 23, so that's the variable, the array, dot splice, right? Think cutting, think removing, and then it's numbers comma 1, and again all this is doing, it is taking the value that was selected randomly from the array, and it's removing it so that it can't be selected again. And that's exactly how this script works. And I've used this many times now, and I'm going to keep using it because it's a pretty cool feature. And then all it's doing, similar to previous tutorials, is once it has selected that array value, and then it's saved it in the variable, another variable, and it's removed that value from the array, then it's just going to check and it's say, okay, using conditional branches, if array number, which is actually variable 22, if array number equals 1, then I'm going to turn the self switch A of that corner event on. So it's the same script to turn on self switch A. So it's map 3, it's event 2, random monster 1, event 2, self switch A, and that's being turned on. If the result, the array number, which is variable 22, if the result is a 2, then it's going to turn the self switch A on for event 3, which is that number 3, right? I told you I made a mistake. And then if it is array 3, right? If the array number is 3, it's going to turn the self switch for event 4, right? Random monster 2. That's going to turn that self switch A on. Or if it's a 4, it's going to turn the self switch A on for event 5, which is random monster 4. And it's going to set that to true. And that's all it does. So again, it probably doesn't have to have this array reload, because the way I set this up, if we defeat a monster, it gets added back into the array. And if we have all 4 monsters on the screen, yeah, the array is empty, but it doesn't really matter because they can't reappear, right? They can only appear if they're not there. So, and then as soon as we defeat one, that one gets added back to the array. So this part really is not necessary anymore because of re-adding them in. And then this part here is randomly selecting an array value. It's setting that value to another variable so we can use it in a conditional branch. And then it's taking out the value that was randomly selected from the array. It's cutting it. If you didn't do that last script part, it would basically leave that value in the array, and it would be possible to select it again. And then it just checks which one of these is true this time that I'm checking it, and then I will turn that appropriate self switch on. And you notice we don't have any else branches. You don't have to use else branches. It's going to basically find which one is the correct one to do, and then it's going to end. And when it ends, it goes back to where it was before, which was, it triggers this event, right? Because it turns on, or triggers one of these events. It turns on the self switch A, which turns on that event self switch B, which triggers this processing, and then it's done, right? And this is the one that called that random monster test. And so when that common event is done, it does the self switch for the event number 7, and then it turns this self switch A on, which moves this page, which makes this no longer functional until we leave and come back. And I already showed you before that leaving thing, right? So when we go to leave the map, this is the very first thing that does, is it uses that remote self switch turning on and off, and it turns the self switch A for event number 1, that parallel of that process, it turns it off to false. So it's ready to work again when we come back to this map. Okay. And I talked about this in the previous tutorial. So that's the first thing it does, is it sets that self switch A to false. It turns it off, plays a sound effect, does the door animation, moves the player forward so it looks like they're stepping through the door, plays the sound effect, and then it actually transfers the player to another map. And then when they come back, it's ready to do it all over again. Okay. And that's the end of this map. Everything that's happening on this map, that's the ending. It's the randomly pick, randomly call a common event to randomly decide which monster I'm going to fight over here, and randomly respawn it as many times as we fight it on this map. And this one is remotely activating remotely activating a map event, which is going to be, in this case, randomly deciding which enemy you fight, and then it's going to stay off until we leave and then come back, and then this gets triggered again. And then we have that last part where we're going to use a parallel map event to basically trigger a common event using an array that is going to randomly decide which one of these corner events to activate each time it's called. And if one of these is activated, it can't be selected again, right? So two of those monsters will never appear together. And once we defeat one of them, then it's added back in, and it could possibly be called again to appear. And so you could do lots of things with this. You could turn on two of them. You could turn on three of them. You could make it so one doesn't come back. You could make it so you have to defeat all four before any of them come back. You could do all kinds of different things with this. And so anyway, it's just the mechanics of it. It's the functionality. I hope this helps. I thought this was really cool when I saw it. I wanted to figure out how this worked, and I was I messed around with it. I messed around with it, and when I finally got it to work, and I was like, okay, this is really cool because now it does exactly what I wanted it to do, and it's not doing it's not doing anything I didn't want it to do, and it actually took a little while. I did it wrong a number of times before I got it to work correctly. So anyway, I hope this helps folks. If these videos are helpful, like, subscribe, get notifications, leave comments. And I'm really curious to see if this is helpful to people because I haven't found any tutorials that do this four corner thing or even the concept of it. I haven't seen it. So if there are other things out there and they're better at explaining this, or there's a better, more efficient way of doing it, leave a comment and direct me to it because I'd like to take a look at it and see too because I'm still learning and I'm trying to find more efficient ways to doing things. And I'm trying to do it without plugins. So I'll eventually get to plugins, but right now I'm trying to do this stuff without using plugins, see what I can make the engine do all on its own. So thanks again, folks. I hope these are helpful. I'm glad you found my channel, and I'll try to get some other videos posted up in a little while. And in the meantime, happy developing, happy gaming, and share your resources and let other people know. And hopefully that will help other new people like me learn faster and find what they need. Thank you very much, folks. Have a great night, and I'll see you all later.